it's couldn't have picked a better place.
Yeah.
To start this, and
the Cape Cod Canal Visitor Center.
Right. That kind of grew in the last 5 or 6 years into something that I think is great for the kids and great for the parents. That's a real education.
It's
and
a tremendous asset here.
Yeah, no question.
So, Bill, in 1914, the canal was started, and since that, almost 100 years ago, 100
Right.
years ago next year, the canal has resulted in the Cape Cod becoming an island.
Right.
How has that influenced your reflections on the Cape Cod Canal?
Well, it's a great question because it's the lead-in for why the book is even being considered. The book's title is Reflections from the Cape Cod Canal. It's a book that includes 60 units of photographs that I've taken with the assistance of a couple of other people who have expressed an interest in helping out where possible, and corresponding pages in whether they're poems or short stories or a commentary of importance of the canal. And it's a personal commentary. It's got nothing to do with any specific organization other than the fact that this is a wonderful place and it opens up the world to so many people. A lot of people come to the canal to do certain things. Some of it's more active recreation. Others come just to walk with friends or walk amongst themselves, to talk to themselves. I mean, it's amazing how many people walk on the canal and talk to themselves as they try to sort out a certain issue that is affecting them, usually pretty personal. And for me, back in 2006, 2007, 2008, I came here as part of physical therapy because of surgery that I had had, and I also strongly believe that it's important in a public space as big as this that you find a privacy level to which you're comfortable, and you can communicate to someone like you, Brian, or to, as I said, talk to yourself. And at one point in the Cape Cod Times, there was an article that was credited to an active bike group who were really annoyed by the slow pace of some of the walkers, where these bicyclists were anxiously going at several kilometers per hour speed, and the walkers who don't really care about speed are just interested in just enjoying the environment. So that was my entry into the process, and it turned out over the 3 or 4 years early on that I saw some things that I'd never see if I didn't have this much time on the canal. And the fact that it's cut off from the South Shore by the 3 bridges, and has been for almost 100 years, is the reason why the book is now really important, so we can get it tied up and get it on bookshelves for people to enjoy. It's not about facts, it's all about how people think and use the canal, use it for therapy, both physical and mental, and just a community feeling that this is really a special place that kind of spawns all kinds of thoughts.
We've talked about the Cape Cod Canal becoming a boundary that created an island.
Yep.
But it also created 2 edges, the edge of Cape Cod and the edge of southeastern Massachusetts. And as a result, those edges are really important. They're very important by themselves, not the creation of the island. There's another aspect of the wildlife and the ecosystem here, that it's an important place for various wildlife, not only the migratory wildlife, including sometimes a sea mammal will come down through the canal, but also for bird and other traffic. And we had a bear that crossed the canal.
I don't know how he did it, but he did it.
So maybe you want to talk about how the wildlife affects the reflections of the Cape Cod Canal.
Well, I think one of the more outstanding examples of that was a couple of years ago during the summer. It was a warm summer day, and I'm riding my bike on the other side of the canal, and I came upon a young buck.
We're talking about a deer family. Deer family.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. The deer family. And the buck was gnawing on some viburnum that were quite prevalent on the other side in this location. And he didn't give two hoots about who I was and what I was doing. He just looked up, and he looked up long enough that I got some really nice pictures of how this animal was just overseeing the traffic on the west side of the canal. And the kids stopped, and for me it became a trigger for a writing that will discuss sandwich and Christmas. And this seems so out of place, this book, but he was getting ready for a winter to follow, and who knows, he may have led Santa's sleigh across the canal and onto the Cape. So
did he have a red nose?
He did have a red nose, but it wasn't as red and reflective as I thought it must have been. Yeah. The other side of that, and something that you can touch, was something I just relayed to you, was an evening I came down here in '07, and this gentleman was propagating this beautiful moth. He came down with the female moth, and he'd open up the cage, and the scent of the female moth attracted male moths of the same species, and they'd come into this cage and they'd propagate. And I don't know what the gestation period is. It isn't that important, but on this particular night, it was a night that the Crusaders were in full bloom on their 17-year cycle of their own damage and having fun with us on the Cape. Weird circumstances where, if you're walking or riding on the canal, you were often considered, subjects for live bombing of the Crusaders. But on this particular night, this gentleman who comes down with his camper obviously spends a couple of evenings down here late at night. The Crusaders had all kinds of scents on their own, and they became a microcosm of what this moth was in the process of doing. So he had the ability of separating out the male cicadas from the male moth. These are moths that are called giants in their own way. I wish I could pronounce the name. Beautiful moth I used to catch in the pagodas at camp, when I was considerably younger, but it's a wonderful photograph that will be in the book. So we like the little pieces of wildlife. It's very important. This used to be a marsh here before the canal was built, and tried to be built several times before it was successfully completed in 1914.
The wildlife is important, and the ecosystem is an important new ecosystem, 100 years old now.
Yeah.
But also, I think the importance of the canal for boat traffic.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's the reason it was built. We know it was a critical piece of the convoy system during World War II, and nowadays it's used for both commercial and recreational traffic, as well as an important link when they have the tall ships.
Right.
And I imagine, boat traffic in the canal is going to be a factor in your reflections of the Cape Cod Canal.
Well, there's no question about it. In fact, the introduction to the book is about one of those convoys. It was 2:00 in the morning. I was coming home from work in Worcester, where we had an office up there for 13 years, and I got stopped by a state police officer who didn't like the fact that I had my high beams on, and it disturbed him. So he tracked me down. And he kept me for 15 minutes, thinking that I was kind of a drunk, probably, that should have been off the road. But what he did do is delay my approach over the Bourne Bridge. And what I saw over the Bourne Bridge was this convoy of Canadian cruisers. There were 5 of them that were passing underneath bridge.
These are modern military ships.
Absolutely. They had been somewhere in the South Atlantic, and they were using the shortcut to get back to Canada, and which addresses the issue of building the canal so that you would save the 170 miles or so that would be the route of travel around the canal, even with the tough shoals that exist off the Nauset Beach and so on. So I traced these 5 ships coming up the canal, and when I got up to the Sagamore Bridge, and the tides were such that these ships were going by me as if they were going right by me on a street. And so I call this a highway of shipping, because that's what it is. There's all kinds of interesting personal and governmental ships that come through here at all hours of the day. And when I was introduced recently to Ship Finder software that I would encourage anyone on the Upper Cape to look at, it gives you real-time assessment of what's coming through the canal, and from all directions, usually from New York and from Boston or further north. And we know from work that our company did for the Mirant Corporation when they were expanding their canal interests, that there is at least one, if not more, cruise ship companies. American Cruise Lines, one of the larger independent cruise line companies, loves the canal. They bring their ships through here. They would love to have a port of call here so that they can add to the potential passenger opportunities, to take day trips or overnight trips up the coast or around the Cape, and then use the Mirant port facility, which is the only privately operated and owned port of call on the canal.
We talked about the ecosystem, and it's a very important one, and we've talked about boat traffic. Both those things, and the Cape Cod Canal was built for economic reasons. Maybe you can talk about the economic activity and the future of economic activity that relates to your reflections on the Cape Cod Canal.
Sure. Well, oddly enough, probably the greatest opportunity for economic development in the future on the canal is right here in the Sandwich Boat Basin and lands that are owned and maintained by the current owner. I don't know the current owner, but they are familiar with power plant facilities, and the thinking is, in a proactive way, that the town of Sandwich is trying to anticipate where the ownership is going to go with their operation, so that the potential of public-private partnership might allow for some very, very exciting things to happen along the canal in Sandwich. Now, if I I use the four corners of the canal a lot. That we are in the northeast corner. Across the canal is the northwest corner, where Scussett Beach is, and the viewing points out there. And then on the other end, which is really the west end, it is a interesting difference where the railroad bridge becomes the center of activity on the southeast corner, but on the southwest corner, the Massachusetts Maritime Academy is without question one of the most stunning places. And that in itself, particularly in recent years when several of their alumni have been in the news for good reason, makes this a destination for high schoolers who want to go into the Merchant Marine Academy and get out into working on the oceans. And they bring by themselves into that campus hundreds of thousands of dollars each year, with people coming from all over the country. And they stay here, they rent cottages during the summer perhaps, or certainly hotel rooms. They eat at the restaurants, they do the shopping, and those all hit home to the local entrepreneurs that need that kind of buoyancy, in their business plan as they go forward. So it's a big deal.
The Massachusetts Maritime, I'd say in the past 10 years, has transformed itself into a juggernaut of maritime science and industry.
Right.
And it's been a tremendous asset for the canal as well as the whole region.
Well, when you think about it in those terms, it's even more important. My wife happens to work at the Maritime, MBL,
Marine Biological Laboratory,
which is one of your neighbors in Falmouth. And the importance of just recent history, where they've signed an agreement with the University of Chicago to exploit the tremendous amount of talents from Chicago as well as at the MBL, that will allow them to take advantage of their canal location and all the sea research that they're doing, out of that. And the MMA has got to receive some of the benefits of chartering boats, to be able to go out and research so much of what is in the sea that we know nothing about. It's really kind of cool.
And there's almost a jobs right at hand.
Absolutely.
When those kids graduate from MS Maritime Academy, they may have jobs right here on Cape Cod rather than going here to Réunion.
And I think that element is often forgotten by people who have lived here a long time and don't realize that one of the major research laboratories is our sea. And the MBL, Woods Hole, Oceanographic, and the Sea Grant folks down in the Falmouth region of the canal are people that, look to the future, and these people are extremely intelligent. They come from all over the world, and from what my wife indicates, they're really top shelf people. And they spend their money here, they'd like to spend more time here, and with the current sequester that's going on that affects the Department of Defense and other departments of research, at the federal government, it's put a tie on the amount of research that's being done. But I'll give you one brief example. One of the scientists that she works with who studies cuttlefish and zebrafish and how these two organisms, change their colors in seconds to camouflage them. And the Department of Defense, which is one of the major funders of this research, wants to use it as an application in the future for military, camouflage and types of things that may have some human application in the years to come.
This interview is taking place in June 2013, and just a few days ago, I think to further highlight the importance of the Maritime Academy and all the marine sciences here, is that James Cameron, the Oscar winner for producing and directing the movie Titanic, as well as a few others, was at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute just the other day, and he's donating the ship the submersible that he took down to over 35,000 feet in the ocean in the Pacific. He just donated it to the Woods Hole scientific community, and that's a big statement of what we're talking about.
Absolutely, and then something that is a little less serious is the filming of the Dolphin Tale. The lead actor there was one of my wife's and several heartthrobs of women, and oh gosh, and I'd be crucified because I can't remember his name, but he's an exceptional individual who lives on the Cape in the summer with his family out in Chatham, and but that film alone brought a lot of recognition to MBL, and we enjoyed it. We spent the money to go see it on the big screen just because we had an attachment, to the filming of it and the money that was being invested, as a result of the filming of this particular piece of art. So other than the punishment I'm going to get at home for not remembering the lead singer, we'll go on freely from there.
You can text it on the bottom of the film later on. We talked. You mentioned the railroad bridge, and the railroad bridge just recently in 2013 took on even more of a prominence. It has served commercial purposes and recreational purposes. But I want you to talk about how its next history of the Cape Cod Canal Railroad Bridge just started happening. Well, what did decades ago.
Yeah, the canal's railroad bridge is really something extraordinary.
It's iconic.
And I never realized this is a bridge that I took just for granted until fairly recently, when I've been down at the railroad bridge on the southeast corner and overheard literally hundreds of people commenting, I had no idea how this worked. I've never seen it down. And it's really incredible. In fact, the bridge down kind of offers up a what if discussion in the book. What if we could close the canal at the railroad bridge and then think about how customary locks that you find in canals that adjust to sea level rise, are under account. But the bridge is spectacular. And, one of our photographers that has been helping me on this book took a picture of the first train called the Cape Cod Flyer that came over on Memorial Day weekend, and it's really an awesome picture of the new train engine, breaking out from underneath the Corps of Engineer emblem on the bridge as it arrived on Cape Cod on that Friday evening. And the hope is, and this is not something that is new news, under the Dukakis administration there was a hope that train service would allow for people an alternative to get here from New York and Boston. This Amtrak partnership with the MBTA in Boston is only a month old, less than a month old. It's working very well. It's fun to see it land in Buzzards Bay. I haven't seen the issuance of people coming off the train in Hyannis yet, but at least here they have buses to all kinds of port of call.
Very well planned.
Very well planned by Tom Cahere and the Regional Transit Authority.
Tom Cahere, who's a native here.
That's correct. He's lives in Bourne, was our representative before he moved on to bigger and better things. Just a fine human being, but it's really cool to see that entire 500-foot span, cover this double-decker train that leaves Boston at 5:12 on a Friday afternoon, and it's been very well received. And we have pictures on that same evening of the traffic on the Sagamore Bridge, which was backed up, and we're going to play both of those issues because we've all, whether we like it or not, have to admit that we've been halted by the traffic going over one of the bridges.
Although I must point out that about 95 or more % of the time, there's never any traffic on the bridges.
Well,
it's just when everybody wants to come down, there's traffic.
Life is what you perceive it to be.
That's right, exactly.
And so the traffic, which was backed up over the camber of the bridge, and red lights aglow, it's just.
And the train just
goes whizzing along, and one of the earlier efforts on my writing was the Cape Cod Way, which is a description of being stuck in traffic, coming down on a Friday night and the train whipping underneath the Sagamore Bridge on the way, eastbound to Hyannis, and the way is the history, the reference that this bridge was built for people to come from New York, particularly New York. And the hope is that if the MTA partnership with Amtrak works out well this summer, that Amtrak will step up and recreate traffic from Grand Central Station to bring what will be a fairly large number of people directly to the Cape.
One of the things we've talked about the edges, we've talked about the canal. One of the important things that ought to be mentioned is that the forethought that went into the bicycle and walking paths that span the entire length of the canal on both sides.
Right. This is what most of the people who come to the canal that aren't on a boat or a ship, see. The 13 miles of canal trail on either side, coming and going, are really testament to the anticipation that in years to come people will walk, people will skateboard, they'll come on their bikes, they'll grab a lunch. Fishermen use it as a way of getting, and they show up in the morning with tubes off the back of their bikes with more rods than they know what to do with, and they love it. And it's really kind of interesting to see how people get around. I know my father-in-law, Barbara's, my wife's father, was hired by the Corps one summer about 10 years ago to track the other side of the canal and how many people use it on a typical weekend day. And there were over 10,000 people on one particular weekend, he couldn't keep up with the numbers of people that would park in the northwest corner, both here at Scusset Beach and down by the Sagamore Bridge, that would just run 6 miles or walk 6 miles or just kind of contemplate how beautiful the canal is.
It's contemplative, isn't it?
Yes, no question, no question.
That
So,
was a tough one for me.
well, that's all right. It's a long word, and we don't really think in long words when we come here. We
No,
just,
the simple life.
one of my favorite pictures is a picture of this young woman and her son, clearly about a 4 or 5 year old, and they were sitting on this side of the canal, and they were looking towards the east end, and I made up a story of a discussion between them, and that her husband was in the Maritime Academy training ship, the T.S. Kennedy, and then all of a sudden, he became the first guy through the canal coming in, and they never come in from this end. They always used to come in from the other end.
Sure.
And he's just so excited to see his father's ship come down the canal. And then it got stopped to offload some things at Joe's Market. And then they decided to go over to Seafood Sam's to have, some lunch. And the mother said she would take care of the bill if she could have, some of his fried onions. And he agreed to do that. So the story continued. But it's those kinds of impromptu storylines that happen every day on the canal. It's really great.
We're being hosted right now by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and
Right.
probably most people don't understand that the canal and the work that's been done by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers on the canal, which governs virtually the entire canal area. And I look at it as when government does its best.
Yes.
And so you may want to say something about the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers
Well,
and what
I
they've
think
done
that-
for this canal.
Absolutely, and I don't think they can ever do enough here. I mean, it's they rule this with a tight fist. I know when we
I think it's a kind of a nice fist. I mean, what
well,
they've done.
it's user friendly.
Yeah.
In that respect, I agree. But when we first met to talk about the centennial celebration in 2014, we looked at the possibility of things that, we knew the private sector between Bourne and Sandwich could do, but whether the canal operators would allow it to happen is a whole different story. And most of what we wanted to do, which would be exciting to the audience, wasn't something that the canal proprietors were interested in seeing done. Things like better lighting on the bridges, so that if you're going up the canal, the bridges, which are the trademarks of the canal in many ways, could be highlighted in a better format. Fireworks or those kinds of things that are, draw attention. Some wonderful events are going to happen at the centennial celebration, and they wouldn't be able to happen without Admiral Gagnon, who's in charge of the celebration, and he's part of the Corps, and people like Sam Gray here. Samantha, but she likes Sam.
I know.
No, and Samantha's just
The audience might
been
not fully understand that.
all right. She's the lady in charge of the visitor center here in Sandwich, and she's done a great job with limited balance of budget to bring the core of the history and how it operates to a group of people like the students
Yeah.
that are in there
There's going
now.
to be students in and out here all week.
That's right. So it's a wonderful spot, and the Corps can make up a lot of bad press from what they do in the Middle West right here on the canal by taking exemplary care of
I think
what we have.
I personally think they've done a great job with the bridges and the canal and
Yeah.
this beautiful visitor center. It's
Yeah.
a really warm
Absolutely.
and friendly organization to
Yep,
us.
exactly.